There was a time when the world saw Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg as two sides of the same coin. One built the digital foundation, the other built the digital future. But behind the cameras, behind the polite smiles and shared conferences, there was a storm that few people knew about. It wasn't about money or power, it was about principles, what technology should mean to humanity. It all began one quiet afternoon in a private conference room in Seattle. Gates had invited Mark for a closed-door discussion about the future of artificial intelligence and global impact. For years, they had respected each other, Bill as the mentor, Mark as the prodigy. But that day, something shifted. As they sat across from each other, the air felt heavy. "Mark," Bill started, his tone calm but firm, "you're changing the world faster than the world can handle it." Mark smiled faintly. "That's the point, Bill. Innovation doesn't wait for permission." Bill leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Innovation without responsibility is chaos. You can't play with human behavior like it's a coding experiment." Mark looked unbothered. "You once changed the world with software, Bill. You broke rules too. Remember Windows? Remember how everyone said you were too controlling? Now you're preaching responsibility?" Bill paused, his jaw tightening. "That's exactly why I'm saying this. I made mistakes. I learned from them. You still think breaking systems makes you a visionary." Mark stood up slowly, walking toward the window overlooking the Seattle skyline. "People want connection, Bill. I'm giving them that." Bill followed, his voice rising slightly. "You're giving them addiction, not connection. You're teaching them to scroll instead of think." The silence that followed was loud enough to echo. For the first time, Mark turned around, and there was anger in his voice. "You think you understand my generation? You built an empire on control. I'm building one on freedom." Bill's tone softened, but his words cut deeper. "Freedom without discipline isn't freedom, Mark. It's noise." For a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of 2 decades of tech evolution hung between them. Gates walked back to the table, his steps slow, thoughtful. "When I was your age, I thought I could fix everything with code. But code doesn't fix people. It amplifies them, the good and the bad. And right now, you're amplifying both without realizing the cost." Mark crossed his arms. "And what's the cost, Bill? People sharing their lives? Expressing themselves? That's not a problem, that's progress." Gates shook his head, almost disappointed. "No, Mark. Progress is when technology makes people better. You're making them dependent." Mark frowned, his voice colder now. "You sound like every old man who's afraid of the future." Bill smiled sadly. "And you sound like every young man who thinks he owns it." The conversation could have ended there. But it didn't. What came next wasn't just a disagreement, it was a clash of philosophies. Gates believed technology should serve humanity. Zuckerberg believed humanity would adapt to technology. Gates saw responsibility. Mark saw revolution. "You're building a machine that watches people more than it helps them," Bill continued. "You've turned connection into currency." Mark's reply was sharp. "And you turned software into monopoly." "Don't talk to me about ethics, Bill." The words hit hard. Even Bill had to take a breath. "I'm not denying my past," he said quietly. "But I used my mistakes to help fix things." "What are you doing, Mark? Are you fixing or feeding the problem?" Mark turned away, looking down at his phone, almost symbolically. "The world decides what's right, not you, not me." For a moment, Bill just stared at him, the man who once looked up to him now standing as his equal, maybe even his challenger. "You think the world decides?" Bill asked softly. "No. The algorithms decide. And you built them." Mark looked up, his eyes flashing. "And people use them willingly." Bill sighed. "Addiction doesn't need force, Mark. just design. The tension was electric. Neither of them shouted, but every word felt like a punch. It wasn't about ego anymore, it was about legacy. Gates was defending the soul of technology. Zuckerberg was defending its evolution. After minutes of silence, Gates finally said, "Mark, one day you'll understand that every decision you make with your code changes lives, not just online, but in reality. When that day comes, I hope you'll remember this conversation." Mark didn't respond right away. He slipped his phone into his pocket, looked at Bill, and said quietly, "Maybe. But I hope you'll remember that without risk, there's no progress." The meeting ended there. No handshake, no smiles, just two men walking out of the same room, both believing they were right. Outside, cameras waited for a photo. They smiled for the flash, but that smile never reached their eyes. In the days that followed, rumors spread across Silicon Valley. Some said Gates had tried to warn Zuckerberg about AI ethics. Others said Zuckerberg challenged Gates to think like the next generation. The truth was somewhere in between. Weeks later, at a conference, a journalist asked Gates what he thought about Zuckerberg's vision for the future. Bill paused, smiled politely, and said, "He's brilliant, but brilliance without wisdom can be dangerous." When they asked Mark the same question about Bill, he replied, "He built the path we walk on. But sometimes, the old road needs breaking." Years later, both men would look back at that conversation differently. Gates would see it as a warning, a reminder that the next era of tech must balance innovation with humanity. Zuckerberg would see it as a test, proof that challenging the old guard was part of progress. But deep down, both of them knew that they needed each other. The past needs the future. The future needs the past. Without Gates, there would be no foundation. Without Zuckerberg, there would be no evolution. And yet, that one heated discussion remained in both their memories, a moment when two of the world's greatest minds collided not over money or fame, but over what it truly means to change the world. For Gates, happiness meant responsibility. For Zuckerberg, happiness meant freedom. Maybe both were right, or maybe both were wrong. Because in the end, the question isn't who wins the argument, it's whether the world becomes better because of it.